Spoofing is the manipulation or lying about an IP address normally done with malicious intent. For example, if we have an attacker who is connecting to a server, let's imagine the server is over here on the 23.1.2 network, and let's imagine it's .150. And the attacker is sending packets over to that server. If the attacker spoofs or lies about its source IP address, and it claims in the packets that the source IP address is 23.1.2.120, the traffic could go like this, from the attacker to the server, and then the server would respond back to PC1, because the server believed that's where the request came from. So in this scenario, we have two victims. We have the server who's getting a bogus request, and then secondly, we have PC1, an innocent bystander who's getting all these inbound responses to it based on requests it never made. Now, fortunately, in a checkpoint environment, we have the ability to implement anti-spoofing, and it basically goes like this. When this feature is enabled on the interfaces of the gateways themselves, when a packet comes in, the firewall is going to take an extra moment and say, let's see, where's this packet coming from? And if the attacker is claiming that the packet is coming from 23.1.2.120, if that's the spoofed source IP address, the gateway is going to look at its routing table and say, whoa, wait a second. That packet came in on E1. However, if I was going to forward a packet to that IP address, I would be using E0. And because when that packet came in, it didn't come in on E0, which is the interface that Firewall 1 would use to reach that given IP address, if anti-spoofing is enabled, that packet will be dropped. And it will never be forwarded over to the server. So in Smart Console, over here on the left in the navigation pane, we'd click on Gateways and Servers. And here, let's go to Firewall 1 just by double-clicking on it to open up its properties. And then we'll click on Network Management for Firewall 1. And here it's showing us the current interfaces on Firewall 1. And by default, it thinks Ethernet 1 is the external interface because that happens to be where our default route is. So if you happen to modify or manipulate the default route in the web user interface, when you come back to Smart Console, it would be wise to open up the properties of that gateway and go to Network Management and just click on this icon right here for Get Interfaces. And that will reread in the topology information based on the default route. Then once you click on Accept, if we had changed the default gateway that's now using a different interface, that now would be reflected here. Now, to continue on with our story about anti-spoofing, let's go ahead and double-click on Ethernet 1, which is our external interface because that's where the default route is. So we'll double-click on Ethernet 1 to open up the details of that. And then for Ethernet 1 with General selected, regarding topology, if we click on Modify, this is where we could specify a specific zone that we want this interface to be associated with. It's also where we would enable or disable anti-spoofing. And in the event that we have some small exceptions where we don't want to do the anti-spoofing check, we can put a check in this checkbox right here. Don't check packets from, and then from the drop down, we could select an object, or we could create a new object that represents the IP address or addresses that we want to exclude from the anti-spoofing check. So unless you have exceptions, you don't need to check that bottom box. And by default, anti-spoofing, this feature is enabled, and it's a good idea. In this nugget, we've taken a look at the concept of anti-spoofing in Checkpoint. We've also identified how to enable it by going to the individual interfaces on a gateway and then making sure the checkbox is checked to enable anti-spoofing. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.